Disclaimer: this video contains discussions of real criminal cases and sensitive subject matter. It is created for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. It started with a smell, not a strong one at first, just something faint, something that didn't belong. A mixture of sweet decay and cleaning solution that drifted across the summer air in the small, quiet town of Portage, Michigan. It came from the home of John and Nancy D. Battle, the friendly middle-aged couple who waved at neighbors, tended to their garden, and hosted polite dinners that always ended early. For years, they'd lived beside young families, retirees, and students. Ordinary people who never imagined evil could live right next door. But one July morning in 2020, that faint odor turned into the first clue that would unravel one of the most disturbing secrets the town had ever known. Behind their perfect smiles and trimmed hedges, the Battles were hiding something no one could have prepared for: the remains of multiple people, victims of a double life carefully masked by kindness, charm, and routine. It would take months of forensic investigation, countless witness interviews, and the courage of one neighbor who couldn't shake her intuition to expose the truth that had been festering only a few feet away. This is the true story of the couple next door who were hiding a horrifying secret. They were the kind of couple that made a neighborhood feel safe. John Battle was a retired electrician who spent his mornings mowing the lawn with near-perfect line. Nancy worked part-time at a thrift shop, always bringing cookies to share with co-workers. They'd been married for over 25 years. No children, just their golden retriever named Daisy, and a quiet routine. Neighbors described them as private but polite. They never caused trouble, never raised their voices, and never drew attention. But behind the drawn curtains and the smell of lemon, scented bleach that often lingered outside their home, something sinister had taken root. A few doors down lived 34-year-old Jessica Phillips, a nurse who had grown close to Nancy through casual front yard chats. Nancy often talked about her husband's declining health, about how he was not himself lately. Jessica, who worked long hours, didn't think much of it, until one evening when she stopped by to drop off a small houseplant and noticed something deeply unsettling. Nancy's hands were trembling. Her eyes darted toward the hallway as if someone, or something, was listening. She whispered that John wasn't sleeping, and that he'd done things he couldn't undo. When Jessica asked if she was safe, Nancy forced a smile and changed the subject. That would be the last conversation Jessica ever had with her. Days later, Nancy vanished. John told neighbors she had gone to stay with her sister in another state, but her car remained parked in the driveway. The porch light, always off by midnight, now burned day and night. And then came the smell. When officers performed a welfare check, John was calm, even cooperative. He let them inside, offering coffee while standing between them and the basement door. But it was already too late. Investigators soon discovered traces of blood near the entryway leading downstairs. The concrete floor, recently painted, still bore faint impressions. Footsteps, smears, a drag pattern too distinct to ignore. When they lifted the fresh paint with luminol, the entire basement glowed. What they found next stunned even veteran detectives. Hidden behind a wall of stacked boxes was a freezer, locked, sealed with duct tape, and covered with tarps. Inside were the remains of not one, but two bodies. One was identified as Nancy. The other belonged to a woman reported missing in 2017-57-year-old Cheryl Warren, a co-worker of John's from a previous electrical contracting job. Cheryl had vanished on her way to a client's home years earlier. Her car was found abandoned, her phone and purse left behind. Police had chased leads for months before the case went cold. It turned out she'd never left John's company that afternoon. As forensic teams combed through the property, they unearthed more evidence. Traces of blood beneath the deck, a second burial site near the back fence, and a small box containing jewelry and ID cards from at least 3 other missing women. Each item represented a life cut short. Women who'd crossed paths with John through work, church, or casual errands. Detectives soon uncovered John's disturbing double life. He had volunteered as a handyman for elderly women in need, offering to fix electrical issues or install fixtures for free. But once alone, he became a predator, meticulous, organized, and cruel. His wife, Nancy, had discovered his secret 2 years before her death. Afraid of losing everything, she helped him cover up what he'd done, convincing herself it was a one-time mistake. But the guilt consumed her. In her final weeks, she began documenting everything in a private notebook. Dates, names, locations, and chilling confessions of what her husband had forced her to help conceal. That notebook was later found in a kitchen drawer under a pile of takeout menus. A timeline of murder written in a trembling hand. When confronted with the evidence, John Battle initially denied everything. But DNA from the freezer and the soil beneath his deck told a story no denial could erase. In court, prosecutors described him as a man who weaponized trust. Neighbors, sitting in disbelief, realized how close they had lived to darkness disguised as decency. During sentencing, the judge called the case a tragedy built behind a white picket fence. John Battle received multiple life sentences without parole. As for Nancy, her role remains debated. Some see her as an accomplice, others as a woman trapped by fear, unable to escape the monster she once loved. Her diary entries revealed both horror and remorse, a testament to how control can masquerade as devotion. Today, the house on Cedar Lark Lane sits abandoned. The windows are boarded. Grass grows wild around the mailbox that still bears their name. But those who live nearby say sometimes, late at night, they see a light flicker in the basement window, reminder of the evil that hid in plain sight. Because sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones who break in. They're the ones who live right next door. When investigators sealed off the Battle residence, the neighborhood transformed overnight. Reporters crowded the once quiet cul-de-sac, drones hovered above rooftops, and police tape fluttered in the wind like a grim flag marking the boundary between normal life and something unspeakable. Detective Rachel Moore, a 20-year veteran of the Michigan State Police, was among the first to step back inside after the discovery. What she saw was unsettling in its precision. The house didn't look chaotic or filthy. It looked managed. Every shelf dusted, every picture frame aligned. But beneath that false order was an undercurrent of panic, a silence that seemed to hum. The forensic team cataloged everything. They found hidden compartments inside toolboxes, false bottoms in dresser drawers, and a digital camera memory card wrapped in plastic beneath a loose floorboard. When they loaded the card, it contained over 200 photos, each of a woman, each in a different home, many believed to have disappeared over the past decade. Every image had the same eerie detail, a clock visible in the background marking the exact time of each abduction. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit joined the case soon after. Profilers described John Battle as an organized offender with ritualistic tendencies. His meticulous record-keeping and fixation on control mirrored traits found in other notorious killers. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer who bound and documented his victims, and Robert Hansen, the butcher baker, who maintained trophies to relive his crime. Nancy's role, however, was more complex. Her diary, now central to the investigation, painted a portrait of a woman slowly breaking under the weight of her husband's secrets. She wrote about sleepless nights, constant fear, and her own complicity. "I told myself he needed help," she had written, "but when I saw the second woman, I knew there was no helping him anymore, only hiding." Her last entry, dated just 3 days before her death, read, "He said it's better if I go first. I don't think I have a choice." It was clear Nancy knew her end was coming. As detectives continued searching the property, cadaver dogs alerted to a patch of disturbed soil near the fence line. Beneath 3 feet of earth, they unearthed human remains wrapped in plastic sheeting. Dental records later confirmed the victim as 44-year-old Patricia Webb, another of John's supposed clients. She'd gone missing in 2013. Each discovery deepened the horror. What began as the murder of a wife evolved into the unmasking of a serial predator hiding in plain sight. John Battle's methods followed a chillingly consistent pattern. He would identify vulnerable women, often widows or women living alone, by offering free or low-cost electrical repair services. He'd gain access to their homes, study their habits, and find ways to isolate them. Once trust was established, he'd strike. He stored trophies, rings, ID cards, even strands of hair, inside small boxes labeled with fake project names. Every label was neat, written in the same block handwriting: Project Willow, Project Cedar, Project Mary. When confronted with the evidence, John sat silently through most of the interrogation. But investigators said his calmness was disturbing. He smiled when shown photos of his victims, describing his crimes as corrections of fate. The prosecution built an airtight case. DNA from at least 4 women matched samples taken from inside his basement and backyard. His fingerprints were found on multiple personal items belonging to victims, and Nancy's diary corroborated the timeline of each murder. During the trial, prosecutors played recorded interviews where John tried to rationalize his actions. "Some people don't deserve to walk free," he had said flatly. "I just helped the world balance itself." The courtroom fell silent when a projection screen displayed the list Nancy had written in her final days. 12 names, each belonging to a woman who had vanished between 2008 and 2019. Forensic teams could confirm 6. The other 6 remain missing to this day. When the verdict came, John Battle showed no emotion. He was sentenced to multiple life terms without parole. The judge called him a predator whose mask of normalcy made him far more dangerous than any monster in the dark. In the months that followed, the house was demolished. But even in ruin, the ground itself seemed to remember. Locals say grass refuses to grow evenly over the patch where the basement once stood. Some neighbors moved away, others stayed, bound by a shared trauma that reshaped their sense of safety. Jessica Phillips, the nurse who had once been Nancy's friend, became an advocate for domestic violence awareness. She started a nonprofit called Nancy's Light, dedicated to helping partners trapped in dangerous relationships. Her words at the foundation's opening still echo today. Evil doesn't always look like a stranger. Sometimes it smiles, waves, and lives right next door. When the final verdict against John Battle was handed down, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. The evidence had been overwhelming: DNA, photographs, and Nancy's tragic diary. But for those who'd lived beside him for years, disbelief lingered like a fog that refused to lift. How could a man who waved every morning, who offered to fix porch lights and lawn mowers, be capable of such horror? How could a couple so ordinary harbor a secret so monstrous? The answers, investigators later revealed, were buried in psychology and in plain sight. Forensic psychologists studying the Battle case described John as a high-functioning psychopath, intelligent, charming, and eerily methodical. He knew exactly how to present himself to avoid suspicion. Neighbors saw only what he wanted them to see, a polite man with a calm demeanor and helpful hands. Behind closed doors, however, he maintained total control. He decided what Nancy wore, who she could speak to, even when she was allowed to leave the house. Her friends recalled how she had begun to fade in the last few years, her makeup lighter, her hair often unwashed, her laugh quieter. She'd once been full of life, but that light had slowly dimmed. Psychologists later determined that Nancy's complicity was rooted in coercive control. She lived under constant threat, her will fractured by years of psychological abuse. In private, she was forced to help cover John's crimes, handing him cleaning supplies, helping move boxes, even digging shallow pits in the yard without knowing exactly what they were for. It wasn't a partnership. It was captivity disguised as marriage. Once the forensic team began to analyze the hidden trophies, a grim picture came into focus. DNA linked John Battle to multiple cold cases across Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, victims long forgotten, families still waiting for closure. A small brooch found in a basement drawer matched one worn by 48. Year, old Brenda Ward, a woman who vanished after a routine visit from an electrician in 2010. Another discovery, a woman's bracelet engraved with the initials E.M., connected Battle to the disappearance of 39-year-old Emily Monroe, missing since 2014, but the most chilling find came from beneath the garage floor. There, embedded in hardened cement, was a metal keychain belonging to 52-year-old Diane Matthews, who had disappeared after posting an online ad seeking handyman help for her elderly mother. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became. John Battle was not just a killer, he was a hunter. Every victim had been chosen carefully, isolated, and silenced. When the trial reached its emotional peak, prosecutors introduced Nancy's final diary entry into evidence. It was short. Just one paragraph written in shaking handwriting. "If someone finds this, please tell them I'm sorry. I thought I could make it stop. I thought I could love him enough to fix it. But love doesn't stop monsters. It feeds them." Those words broke the courtroom. Reporters later wrote that several jurors wept openly. Even seasoned detectives turned away. The entry shifted public perception. Nancy was no longer seen simply as an accomplice, but as another victim of John's cruelty. The prosecution ultimately withdrew any charges against her estate, framing her not as a conspirator, but as a woman consumed by fear, guilt, and a false hope of redemption. Despite overwhelming evidence, John Battle never admitted guilt. Even during his sentencing hearing, he refused to speak about the victims, instead offering a cryptic line that sent chills through everyone present: "You'll never find them all." That statement prompted law enforcement to reopen several unsolved disappearances in neighboring states. To this day, search teams continue to analyze the pattern of his work history and travel routes. Authorities believe there may be more victims buried along construction sites where he once worked. One investigator later said, "We're not just digging for bodies anymore, we're digging for the truth he buried with them." The town of Portage would never be the same. Residents who once took comfort in familiar faces now locked their doors. Children no longer played in the streets where the Battles once walked their dog. The illusion of safety had been shattered. The property itself became a symbol of unease. After its demolition, the city erected a memorial garden in its place, a patch of wildflowers planted in honor of the women whose lives were stolen. A small plaque reads, For those who were unseen, unheard, and unremembered, we see you now. The memorial became a place of reflection, not just for victims' families, but for anyone grappling with the realization that evil often hides behind ordinary smiles. The battle case reshaped how local police handled missing person reports and domestic violence investigations. Portage Police Department introduced new policies for welfare checks, prioritizing them even without clear evidence of a crime. State legislators pushed for stronger laws on coercive control, citing Nancy's diary as a tragic example of how psychological abuse can trap victims long before physical harm occurs. In 2023, the Michigan Crime Victims Alliance created the Nancy D. Battle Courage Award, given annually to individuals who come forward with information that leads to the protection of others. Jessica Phillips, the nurse who once tried to help Nancy, was the first recipient. When she accepted the award, she said softly, "Sometimes saving someone starts with a simple question. Are you okay? We ask it every day, but rarely mean it. Nancy taught me to mean it." True crime often focuses on killers, but this story, the story of the couple next door, reminds us that sometimes the most haunting part isn't the crime itself, but the quiet before it, the smiles that hid the screams. The polite waves across driveways, the neighbors who saw everything, yet nothing at all. For every headline, there's a street that still remembers, a porch light that still flickers, a house that once felt safe but now feels heavy with memory. The battle case is not just about murder, it's about what it means to truly see the people around us, to listen when something feels off, to believe that darkness can live right beside light, because evil doesn't always knock, it already has a key. After John Battle's conviction, the media frenzy slowly faded, but the emotional scars left behind in Portage, Michigan, would take years to heal. For those who had lived side by side with the Battles, normal life no longer existed. Every small noise, every flickering light or faint smell of cleaning solution felt like a reminder of how close they'd been to evil. What made this case unforgettable wasn't just the horror of what John did. It was the realization of how long he got away with it, how easily darkness had blended with normalcy. The Battle home, once a place of hospitality and calm, had become a haunting landmark. Reporters described it as a monument to deception. For months, strangers drove by, snapping photos from car windows, whispering as they passed. Some neighbors moved away entirely, unable to reconcile the image of the smiling man who mowed his lawn every Sunday with the predator who'd been burying his victims beneath it. One neighbor, retired teacher Sandra Green, recalled the small signs she'd ignored, the strong scent of bleach, the late night hammering from the garage, the porch light that stayed on for days. "You don't think it's possible?" she told investigators. "You tell yourself there's a logical reason, but the truth was knocking. I just didn't answer." Her words later became a chilling quote used in training seminars for new officers learning about community vigilance. Evil often depends on our politeness to survive. Even after John Battle's sentencing, detectives weren't done. The FBI Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, VICAP, continued to study the patterns of his known victims. They compared his work routes, tool purchases, and gas station receipts to unresolved disappearances stretching back over a decade. One case in particular stood out: the disappearance of 42-year-old Deborah Grant in 2011. She had vanished after a call to a local electrician for a kitchen rewiring job. Investigators re-examined her file, and sure enough, John Battle's signature appeared on the service estimate, written neatly, identical to the handwriting found on his project boxes. When ground-penetrating radar was used on one of his old job sites outside of Kalamazoo, investigators discovered something chilling: a concrete slab covering an area with abnormal voids beneath. Excavation revealed the skeletal remains of a woman wrapped in construction plastic, the same kind found in Battle's basement. DNA confirmed it was Deborah Grant. Her family, who had spent over 12 years searching for answers, finally had closure. But it also confirmed detectives' worst fear. John's victim count was higher than anyone imagined. For those who worked the Battle case, the trauma ran deep. Detective Rachel Moore admitted in an interview that she couldn't sleep for months after the trial. "It wasn't just the murders," she said. "It was how calm he was, how much he enjoyed pretending to be one of us." John's composure, even in court, mirrored the cold self-control seen in other infamous killers. Like Dennis Rader, the BTK murderer, who lived as a family man and church volunteer while secretly documenting his crimes. Rader and Battle shared one unsettling trait. Both meticulously recorded their killings as if preserving trophies of power. One psychologist later testified that John Battle's behaviors fit the diagnostic markers of organized psychopathy with narcissistic traits. He viewed murder not as rage but as control, a way to assert dominance over life itself. The diary Nancy left behind, now studied by criminology students, provided rare insight into what it's like to live beside such a mind. In the months following the conviction, police released portions of Nancy Battle's diary with permission from her remaining relatives. The entries revealed the slow erosion of her identity under John's control. At first, she tried to rationalize his temper and mood swings, but as years passed, her entries grew darker. "He doesn't kill in anger. He kills to feel something. He says when they're gone, he can breathe again. He told me he keeps their things to remember who was in charge. I pretend not to understand. If I tell anyone, he'll bury me too." Those words, discovered after her death, showed the depth of terror she lived in. Experts called her a hostage in her own home. One particularly haunting passage described her attempt to warn a woman named Cheryl not to come over for a repair appointment. She never made the call. Cheryl Warren would become one of John's confirmed victims. Nancy's final act, documenting the truth, became the reason her husband's crimes were fully exposed. Her handwriting may have trembled, but it didn't falter. The surviving families of John Battle's victims turned their pain into purpose. They established the Victims' Legacy Project, a nonprofit dedicated to training law enforcement and community members on how to recognize hidden patterns of abuse, coercive control, and predatory behavior masked by charm. They also lobbied for a new state law requiring background checks and mandatory registration for independent home service workers, a small step toward ensuring predators couldn't easily gain access to potential victims. The law passed in 2024 and was named the Deborah Grant Act. In his final prison interview, conducted by a criminologist studying behavioral pathology, John Battle remained as cold as ever. When asked if he regretted his actions, he smiled faintly and said, "Regret is for the weak. I was just cleaning up the world." When pressed about the number of victims, he leaned back in his chair and whispered, "There are more gardens than graves." That cryptic statement reignited efforts to locate missing women from surrounding areas where he once worked. Some investigators believe Battle used coded names, like Project Maple or Project Stone, to mark burial sites disguised as landscaping or foundation work. Several open searches continue today. 5 years later, the patch of land where the Battle home once stood remains empty. The city designated it as a memorial green space, a small sanctuary filled with native flowers, and a single stone bench engraved with the words, "In memory of those who were lost in silence." Every year, the community gathers there for a candlelight vigil. Mothers clutch photos, former neighbors speak softly about forgiveness, grief, and vigilance, and in that quiet crowd stands Jessica Phillips, the woman who once tried to save Nancy. She never moved away. "If I leave," she said, "then he wins again. We remember so it doesn't happen next door to someone else." The battle case serves as a haunting reminder. Monsters don't always live in shadows. Sometimes they live behind freshly painted walls, greet you with a smile, and borrow your garden tools. They build trust before they destroy it. The story of John and Nancy Battle isn't just about murder, it's about complacency, about the cost of silence, and about the fragile illusion of safety that blinds us to danger. If this story has taught us anything, it's that evil can live anywhere, behind any door, wearing any face, and sometimes it's the couple next door who seem the most perfect, that we should have feared all along. The story of John and Nancy Battle did not end with the verdict, or even with the destruction of their home. What followed in the years after became a case study for criminal psychologists, homicide detectives, and survivors of coercive control. The house might have been erased, but the memory, the warning, lived on in every file, every lecture, and every sleepless night of those who touched the investigation. For the people of Portage, Michigan, the name Battle became a reminder that evil can hide under kindness, that a wave from a porch can disguise a nightmare. But for investigators, it became something else, a blueprint of how manipulation, fear, and silence can intertwine to let a monster thrive for years. Months after John Battle's sentencing, an evidence technician reviewing digital archives came across an encrypted flash drive that had been seized from one of his toolboxes, but never fully examined. When decrypted, the drive contained a single document titled Garden Inventory. At first glance, it appeared to be a list of home repair jobs, names of towns, project notes, and timestamps, but something about the wording felt off. The listed projects weren't addressed. They were coordinates, and each entry included cryptic comments like maple, done, cedar, no witness, stone, quiet. Detectives from the Michigan State Police Geospatial Unit began mapping the coordinates. 3 led to confirmed job sites. 2 led to remote wooded areas where John had once camped. 1 led to an overgrown parcel of land outside South Bend, Indiana. That site would later yield partial skeletal remains, another unidentified woman. DNA testing linked her to a missing person case from 2015. Lisa Chapman, a 41-year-old accountant who had vanished while renovating a lake cabin. Her name had never appeared in connection with John Battle before. With that discovery, investigators officially raised his confirmed victim count to 7. But in the digital document's header, written faintly in metadata, there was a chilling subtitle, 12 Gardens. 5 more victims remain unaccounted for. The case drew eerie comparisons to other infamous serial offenders who lived double lives. Like Dennis Rader, John Battle carefully constructed a facade of respectability, serving neighbors, volunteering locally, and blending into suburban routine. Like John Wayne Gacy, he used his own home as a graveyard, masking horror beneath domestic normalcy. And like Bruce MacArthur, the Canadian landscaper who buried his victims in planters, Battle's gardens became metaphors for hidden graves. Criminal profilers concluded that Battle's meticulousness wasn't about hiding guilt. It was about asserting control. Every project was his way of marking territory, of proving he could manipulate perception indefinitely. When investigators revisited his statements, one chilling line stood out: "You plant things where no one wants to dig." In the aftermath, the voices of those who almost became victims began to surface. One woman, identified only as Megan, came forward after recognizing Battle's face in a news report. In 2016, she had hired him for a small electrical repair through a local classified site. He was friendly, quiet, nothing unusual. But as he worked, he insisted she stand closer to hold the flashlight steady. Later, he offered to check the breaker box in her basement. Something in his tone made her uneasy. She declined. Weeks later, she noticed his car driving slowly past her house, more than once. She told herself it was a coincidence. "I didn't report it," she said in an interview, "because nothing really happened. But now I know what I almost did." Her story, and others like it, became instrumental in spreading awareness about early warning signs, patterns of behavior that victims often dismiss because they seem too small to matter. The Michigan Bureau of Investigation eventually published a detailed report on the Battle case, now required reading for law enforcement training in the region. The report emphasized pattern awareness, the subtle behavioral consistencies that separate genuine helpfulness from predatory grooming. It also outlined key oversights. Multiple welfare checks were dismissed because John appeared calm and cooperative. Credit card anomalies were ignored because his purchases, bleach, tarps, soil, were common. Domestic concerns from Nancy's coworkers never escalated because she denied abuse. Each oversight became a case study in how predators exploit systems built on trust. In 2025, a journalist researching the case for a true crime documentary received a handwritten letter from a maximum security facility in Jackson, Michigan. The return address, J. Battle, inmate #1,042,987. The letter was short, written in deliberate looping script. "You think I'm gone, but you'll find the rest. You always find the rest. Start where the birds stop singing." Authorities analyzed the cryptic note. The phrase "where the birds stop singing" led investigators to focus on isolated rural regions near defunct farmland, places John had worked in his early 20s. Search efforts continue quietly, involving cadaver dogs, drones, and sonar imaging. To this day, no new remains have been located, but no one truly believes John Battle's words were empty. Every year since the case broke, the town of Portage holds a light vigil in late July. The same week, the smell first drew attention to the Battle home. Residents gather near the memorial garden, each holding a candle for one of the known victims: Nancy Battle, Cheryl Warren, Patricia Webb, Deborah Grant, Lisa Chapman, and 2 still unidentified women. At each vigil, one candle remains unlit, symbolizing those yet unfound. The event has grown beyond the small Michigan town. True crime advocates, families of missing persons, and survivors of coercive control attend to remind the world that horror thrives in secrecy, and that speaking out, even when uncertain, can save lives. The couple next door a story became more than a tragedy. It became a turning point. It taught law enforcement agencies to treat patterns of control, fear, and isolation as serious precursors to violence. It taught communities to trust intuition, to report even subtle signs when something doesn't feel right. And it taught us that appearances, perfect lawns, polite smiles, normal routines, can be the most dangerous disguise of all. Because monsters don't always knock, sometimes they wave to the women who never came home and the families still waiting. Your stories changed laws, saved lives, and forced people to see what they once ignored. To the survivors who lived next door to evil without knowing it, your courage turned horror into awareness. And to those trapped in silence right now, unsure if what they're living is love or control, please know this: fear thrives in quiet. Speak, tell someone. There are people who will listen. Evil hides in ordinary faces, but so does hope. Let this story be a warning and a promise that we will not stop listening for the silence between the knocks, the cries behind the walls, the secrets buried beneath the lawns of perfect homes. Because someone always knows, someone always hears, and next time someone will act.